What's up, you guys? We're going to talk today about Tron and Justin Sun and a lot of the chaos that's going on in the industry, why it's not impossible that people may be surprised Tron may reach out and buy Voyager or someone else. I'm not saying it's going to be specifically Voyager, but I think they're a good candidate. Before we get into that, I want to talk also about why it is that there are big shifts that occur when people don't really expect them. And what I mean by that is, if you remember the internet, the World Wide Web, well, nobody gave a hoot about a computer when some of you might be old enough to remember the Commodore 64 came out. So before that happened, everything was written in computer jargon. You needed to know how to code, and even after that. So in the early days of a personal computer becoming personal, something that parents might actually buy for the home or for their kids, one of the biggest obstacles to overcome was that why would somebody want to do this if they don't know how to write code? It looks preposterous. So I'm going to tell you why there's a synergy with that and where cryptocurrency is right now, along with some industry news, and I'm going to talk about why I think that Tron could come in and save the day, along with Justin Sun, with some, or perhaps one, possibly some, exchanges. So if you're new, hit the bell, subscribe, and like so that you don't miss out on future videos, and I'll get into. By the way, you need to stick with the whole video. I'm going to map it out for you, and it'll all make perfect sense, and I will leave you better than when you came here, and I can tell you that for sure. So, in the early days, people would say, why do I really need a computer? Who cares? We have a TV. I can't imagine somebody having another little box where they have to sit down and, good amount of people don't like math. Well, guess what? If you need to know how to code, you need to play around with math. And it was not a crowd pleaser back then. But what happens is, over time, things, of course, as you know, morph. And they morph into not necessarily what they started out as, but a piece of what they started out as ends up being part of the equation. And then when things get adopted by the masses, there are some tweaks and changes that occur that enable this to happen. And the road between there and it being mass adoption is a long one. So even in the late 60s, email did exist. It did not exist for everyone. It existed within the intranets, people that perhaps were even in the same building and were wired up together, where, Tom could communicate with Jack at the other end of the building and send an email. But of course, it was not working the way it works today. It was conceptually viable and there, but not in a mass adoption type of way. Now, of course, if you had told people back then, hey, you know what, we're going to create a communication device and you're going to be able to speak to people and send messages like that instead of dealing with postal mail, of course, people would have been happy. If people were told that they need to know how to write code in order to do this, the postal mail would have made them postal, and some of them would have been postal mails. Bad joke, I couldn't resist. But anyway, the point I'm trying to make is that when you remove some elements that are tedious from an equation or a product or a service, that can mean the difference between greatness and I can't do without this. So what's happening with crypto right now is it's in the strainer, and all those impurities are getting wiped out. They're being strained, like as if you were making some pasta and you wanted to strain out the water and whatever impurities might be in there, and you're using that strainer. The same thing that happened with the computer, the personal computer, in the 70s, in the 80s, and then as they became more interesting, of course, as we all know, in the 90s, because you did not need to know how to write code. There were things that you needed to get used to, of course, using a mouse, using the screen, the interactivity, how it all worked, how to guide yourself with the search engine, how you could find things. Sure, but code was taken out of the equation. So with crypto, what does it mean? What am I actually saying? a lot of the things that make it difficult for crypto to be used by everyone will be eliminated the same way that the PCs went mainstream, because the coding was eliminated from the equation. So it became a situation where everyone who wanted to pay attention and was relatively, curious enough was able to use a computer if they just sat down and got used to it. They did not need to be able to, understand sophisticated mathematical equations. They did not need to have to construct their own layouts that would enable them to then do things that were pleasing or interesting to them on the screen. Instead, it was as simple as, being able to type search, find things you're already interested in, and it removed many, many barriers of entry from the equation. So with crypto, the same thing is going to end up happening. And right now, it's going to happen a lot faster than it ever did with the personal computer, because we've already been introduced to an internet. We already have this layout. However, it's a different kind of situation with cryptocurrency. So because those bugs, you could call them, need to be ironed out, and that's why I'm using that example, it's going to be ironed out much quicker, but there are barriers of entry with crypto, and there are malfunctions, and that's why you do have implosions like what we've been seeing the last couple of months. It's all part of it. It's all part of this cleansing process. But crypto will get to a point where everyone, not just younger people, not just people in their 20s or teens, but everyone in their 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, and even some people in their 80s and 90s will be able to use it as easily as turning on a TV and pushing a couple of buttons, as easily as using the internet if they're interested enough. Now, I want to make my comparison with what I was trying to say in terms of Tron. So USDD, people are starting to talk favorably about it. We have InvestorsObserver.com who was saying how USDD achieves a low-risk analysis based on Investors Observer research. The proprietary system gauges how much a token can be manipulated by analyzing much money and it took to shift its price over the last 24-hour period, along with the analysis of recent changes in volume and market cap. The gauge between 0 and 100, with lower scores equating to higher risk, while higher values represent lower risk. Okay, fine. So USDD's risk gauge score translates to a low-risk investment at the moment, and portfolio managers who heavily weigh risk assessment will find this gauge more relevant when attempting to avoid or discover more risky investments. So we got the low-risk award. Why is that? Because there's a real business behind keeping the stable coin there. And why do I think Tron's going to swoop in with Voyager? Because it'll help them like they swooped in with Poloniex, and they've got the big bread to back it up. See you on the next video. Hope this finds you well.